In the mid-1950s, Los Angeles was the epicenter of an American golden age built entirely on order. The studio system was a well-oiled machine, carefully manufacturing a bright, booming commercial environment. The industry demanded strict adherence to wholesome Technicolor narratives. Cinema screens were dominated by predictable family comedies, and stars projecting a flawless, optimistic reality. Audiences of the era sat passively, accustomed to being spoon-fed safe, easily digestible plots. They gathered in theaters, providing uniform, captive attention to simple narratives and passing gimmicks. An independent filmmaker named John Parker stepped outside of this system. He had no interest in comfortable entertainment, choosing instead to craft a vision born entirely out of darkness. Parker realized that to create something that felt real, he had to leave the safety of the studio lots behind, trading their commercial rules for a world of his own making. Parker's project, Dementia, abandoned traditional storytelling altogether. No explanations are given. It operates instead as a permanent, waking delirium. The visual language forcefully merges two distinct, unsettling styles. It takes the heavy, oppressive shadows of classic film noir and distorts them with the warped reality of 1920s German expressionism. The protagonist is forced to navigate an urban wasteland where the streets and architecture feel hostile, mirroring a character's descent into her own troubled subconscious. The film's most striking choice is the complete absence of dialogue. Not a single word is spoken, forcing the narrative to rely entirely on pure emotion and primal fear. In place of speech, composer George Antheil provided a brilliant, jarring score. His discordant music functions as the frantic heartbeat of the movie. By stripping away the comfort of logic and explanation, Parker created a film that left the 1955 audience trapped in a headspace they weren't yet ready to navigate. When Hollywood systems and local censors screened the raw, uncompromising footage, the reaction was immediate institutional fear. The New York State Board of Censors reviewed the intense psychological horror on screen and dealt a devastating blow, banning the film entirely. During the few brief theatrical runs where the movie did slip through, the general public walked out confused and alienated. The independent producers were suddenly facing a dire financial reality. They were holding a censored, unsellable product, hovering on the brink of total obscurity. Independent filmmaking in the 1950s was already a tightrope walk. For a film as experimental as Dementia, finding a steady audience felt nearly impossible. With no way to reach an audience, the producers were left with a film that was legally invisible. Desperate to recoup their losses, the producers executed a radical pivot. They butchered the film's artistic intent, aiming to sell it to the lowbrow grindhouse and midnight movie circuits. The structural difference between the two versions is striking. The original cut relied purely on eerie silence and its orchestral score. Producers forced an intrusive, booming voiceover onto the silent footage, retitling the movie and trying to force a cheap horror narrative onto the scenes. That booming, sensationalist voice belonged to actor Ed McMahon, hired to manufacture a sense of terror that the images were already providing on their own. A piece of cinema exploring the depths of the human mind had to dress up in the cheap, loud clothing of grindhouse exploitation just to avoid being thrown in the garbage. Decades passed. The rigid censorship standards and commercial trends of the 1950s eventually faded. Modern film historians, horror enthusiasts, and underground collectors began painstakingly digging through forgotten cinematic archives. Hidden away among those forgotten reels, they discovered the original, uncompromised cut of Dementia. The reels that censors once labeled unfit for the public were eventually recognized as a vital piece of cinema, showing a vision that had been buried for half a century. Modern audiences have lived through a revolution in psychological storytelling. The surreal images that once confused viewers now speak a language that today's horror fans understand instinctively. The movie is now recognized as a pioneering work, exploring the nuances of trauma and madness decades before the mainstream industry was ready to try. But it leaves behind a strange historical paradox. If the producers hadn't created the schlocky re-release to generate revenue, the physical celluloid of the original would likely have been discarded and lost forever. The film outlasted both the censors and the critics, walking alone into its own corner of cinema history. While societal norms and commercial trends inevitably fade, a nightmare as singular as this one simply waits for its time to return.